Imagine stepping into a courtyard in Baghdad where the clock tower has been counting time for over 160 years, but the schedules it kept were never meant for public knowledge. Built in 1861 for what would equal $12 million today, the Chishla complex served as the Ottoman Empire's administrative headquarters. But beneath its bureaucratic facade lay something far more sinister. A laboratory for human control that pioneered techniques of psychological manipulation decades before the world had names for such methods. Here, in rooms that appear on no architectural plans, Ottoman authorities conducted systematic experiments in breaking human consciousness. They discovered that isolation could be more devastating than torture, that controlling time could destroy identity more completely than physical pain, and that the most effective prisons are those that look like government offices. The locals whispered about a room you didn't come back from, though no one could agree if it was real or propaganda. But the evidence hidden in basement levels, concealed in dual-purpose corridors, and encoded in administrative documents tells a different story. This wasn't just detention, this was the systematic engineering of compliance through architectural psychology. Charles Dickens called similar methods immeasurably worse than any torture of the body, but he never saw what the Ottomans perfected in Baghdad. Today, we're opening the classified files on the Chishla complex, following the paper trail through decades of bureaucratic camouflage, and uncovering how a clock tower became the metronome for machinery designed to transform human beings into administrative problems. This is forensic archaeology of institutional control, where every corridor tells a story and every locked door conceals techniques that influenced psychological manipulation methods for centuries to come. If you're ready to explore how architecture became a weapon and timekeeping became torture, join our community of history investigators. Because this story goes deeper than you imagine, and what we uncover will change how you see every government building you pass. The river remembers everything. Here, where the Tigris curves through Baghdad's heart, the water has witnessed 15 centuries of power rising and falling like the seasonal floods. But there is something different about this particular bend, this specific stretch of the eastern bank where the morning mist clings longer than it should. The fog lifts slowly, reluctantly, revealing the silhouette that has dominated the Rusafa bank since 1861. The Chishla complex stands like a patient sentinel, its Ottoman lines carved into the city's consciousness. 4 walls embracing a courtyard, a clock tower piercing the sky, architecture that speaks in the universal language of control. Most who pass on the river see heritage, a cultural landmark, a relic of empire transformed into something softer, more palatable for the modern world. But architecture remembers its original purpose. Stone holds memory longer than flesh, and this particular stone was shaped for a specific function, the systematic management of human beings who did not wish to be managed. The local boatmen have their own name for this stretch of water. They call it the Watching Bend, though few can explain exactly what it watches for anymore. Their grandfathers had clearer memories. Their grandfathers remembered when certain boats would dock here in the hours before dawn, carrying cargo that walked upright and never seemed to return. There was a room, the old voices whisper, a room you didn't come back from. Whether this room existed in stone and mortar or merely in the darker chambers of collective memory remains the question that haunts every conversation about this place. But questions have a way of growing larger when the official record grows smaller, and the official record of the Chishla complex has always been remarkably, suspiciously thin. The year was 1860, and the Ottoman Empire was learning to think differently about power. The old ways of ruling through pure force were proving insufficient in an age where London and Paris watched every move through the glass of telegraph wires and newspaper columns. Power needed to be more subtle now, more architectural. It needed to hide its iron fist inside a velvet glove of bureaucracy and proper procedure. Baghdad, the jewel of Mesopotamia, required a new kind of presence. Not just a fortress or a barracks, but something more sophisticated. A complex that could serve multiple functions simultaneously: administration center, military headquarters, detention facility, and symbol of imperial permanence, all wrapped together in a single footprint beside the river. The governor at that time was Mehmed Namık Pasha, a man who understood that the most effective control systems are those that appear to serve legitimate purposes. His orders were precise: create a facility that could house the growing bureaucratic needs of the province while maintaining the military capacity to enforce whatever decisions that bureaucracy might make. Build it fast, build it visible, and build it to last. The chosen location was no accident. Riverfront property had always meant power in Baghdad, but this particular curve offered advantages that went beyond the symbolic. Supply lines could run straight from the water to the complex doors. Troop movements could be observed and coordinated. Most importantly, the psychological effect was unmistakable. The state was literally on the waterline, watching every boat that passed, controlling every approach to the city's commercial heart. Construction began in 1861 with a workforce drawn from every corner of the province. Bricklayers from Basra, stonemasons from Mosul, timber specialists who understood how to make structures breathe in Baghdad's punishing climate. They worked in shifts around the clock, driven by deadlines that had more to do with political necessity than engineering prudence. The labor gangs moved through the narrow streets like ants, carrying their materials grain by grain to the riverbank. Limestone blocks quarried from the hills west of the city, cedar timbers floated down from the north. Iron fittings hammered in forges that burned until the dawn call to prayer. Baghdad itself was being reshaped to feed the hunger of this growing complex, and the city bore the scars of that feeding for years afterward. But speed, as any engineer knows, has its price. Corners were cut that would never show on the final blueprints. Foundations were laid shallower than ideal because the water table fought every excavation. Mortar was mixed fast and used faster, creating weak points that would only reveal themselves decades later when the building began to shift and settle in ways its designers never intended. The architectural plan itself was deceptively simple. Ottoman military tradition called for a rectangular layout organized around a central courtyard, and this template served multiple purposes. Visibility. Every corner could be observed from the center. Circulation. Personnel could be moved efficiently from function to function. Inspection. Commanding officers could review everything under their authority with a single sweep of the eyes. Yet courtyard architecture carries its own psychological burden. The open space at the center appears to offer freedom, air, relief from the claustrophobic press of walls and corridors. But this openness is an illusion when every exit is controlled. When every door requires permission to pass, a courtyard can become the most oppressive space of all, a cage that pretends to be a garden. The acoustic properties were understood from the beginning, though never openly discussed. Sound in a courtyard doesn't dissipate the way it does in open terrain. Instead, it concentrates, amplifies, reflects off the surrounding walls with mathematical precision. A voice raised in the central space can be heard clearly in every room that opens onto it. Footsteps on stone become announcements, orders become omnipresent. This meant that discipline, when it needed to be administered, would have an audience whether one was intended or not. It meant that privacy became a luxury available only to those with authority to close doors and keep them closed. And it meant that the building itself became a kind of amplification device, broadcasting the sounds of control to every corner of its domain. The construction progressed with military efficiency through the summer of 1861 and into the autumn. The basic structure rose month by month: walls, floors, roof beams, interior partitions. But as the building took shape, certain modifications began to appear that had not been included in the original drawings. Additional rooms in the basement levels, corridors that led to dead ends, reinforced doors in locations where simple office doors should have sufficed. When questioned, the supervising engineers offered practical explanations: storage space, mechanical access, security precautions appropriate for a facility that would house sensitive government documents. These explanations satisfied the official inquiries, but the workers themselves began to notice patterns that troubled them. The extra rooms were being finished to different standards, with different materials, as if they were intended for purposes that required more durability and less comfort. A clerk in the provincial accounting office made note of certain line items in the construction budget that didn't match the official specifications. Iron fittings for rooms that were supposed to be simple storage, drainage work in basement areas that were meant to stay dry, lock mechanisms of unusual complexity for doors that were supposed to provide basic security. When he brought these discrepancies to his supervisor, he was told that construction projects always involve complications, that budgets always require adjustments, that the important thing was completion on schedule. But the items remained in the ledger, unexplained and unexplained, like questions that had been asked but never answered. By the winter of 1861, the basic structure was complete, but work continued on the interior systems: heating, ventilation, water supply, waste management. The engineering challenges of making a large facility function efficiently in Baghdad's climate required innovations that had never been attempted before in the region. Some of these innovations worked. Others created problems that would haunt the building for decades. The ventilation system, in particular, proved to be both blessing and curse. Fresh air could be circulated throughout the complex, making the interior spaces more bearable during the crushing heat of summer. But air circulation also meant sound circulation. Conversations in one room could be heard faintly in others. Odors traveled. Privacy became even more elusive than the architecture alone had made it. More troubling were the discoveries made during the installation of the drainage system. Workers digging trenches for pipe placement found evidence of earlier construction: foundation stones that didn't match the current building, ceramic fragments that suggested previous occupation, coins bearing dates that predated the Ottoman presence in Baghdad. The site, it seemed, had a history that extended far beyond the official records. These discoveries were quietly collected and stored, pending examination by scholars who would determine their historical significance. But the scholars never came, or if they did, their reports never became part of the public record. The artifacts disappeared into the same bureaucratic void that seemed to swallow all inconvenient questions about the Chishla complex. As 1862 dawned, attention turned to the construction of the most visible element of the entire project: the clock tower that would rise above the courtyard like an exclamation point in stone. This tower was intended to serve multiple purposes simultaneously: practical timekeeping for the complex's operations, symbolic demonstration of Ottoman technological sophistication, and psychological assertion of control over the most fundamental human experience, the passage of time itself. The tower's foundation required excavation deeper than any other part of the complex, and it was during this excavation that workers made the discovery that would haunt the project for years to come. 20 feet below the surface, they found a chamber, not a natural cave or a remnant of earlier construction, but a deliberately built space with walls, floor, and ceiling crafted from cut stone. The chamber was empty when they found it, but empty in a way that suggested recent use rather than ancient abandonment. The walls showed tool marks from metal implements. The floor was worn smooth in patterns that suggested regular traffic. Most unsettling of all, the ceiling was blackened with what appeared to be soot from torches or oil lamps, indicating that someone had spent considerable time in this underground space, working by artificial light. The supervising engineer made the decision that would establish the pattern for all future discoveries at the site. The chamber was sealed with concrete and forgotten. Official reports made no mention of its existence. Workers were reassigned to other projects, and construction of the tower proceeded as if nothing had ever interrupted the smooth progression from foundation to completion. But workers talk, especially when they're troubled by what they've seen. Stories began to circulate through Baghdad's labor districts about the thing that had been found and buried under the new government complex. Stories that grew more elaborate with each telling, more sinister with each repetition. Stories that began to attach themselves to the building itself, becoming part of its identity in ways that no amount of official denial could prevent. The tower rose through the spring and summer of 1862, its internal structure more complex than its simple exterior suggested. A spiral staircase wound upward through the center, providing access to multiple levels: storage rooms, mechanical rooms, living quarters for the operator who would maintain the clock mechanism, and at the top, the clock chamber itself, fitted with windows facing in all four cardinal directions so that time could be announced to every corner of the city simultaneously. The clock mechanism was imported from London at considerable expense, a symbol of the empire's commitment to modernity and precision. But precision in timekeeping meant precision in everything else as well: schedules, routines, the systematic organization of human activity according to abstract principles rather than natural rhythms. The tower would become Baghdad's metronome, setting the tempo for a new kind of life in which every moment belonged to the state. Installation of the clock required specialists who understood the delicate relationship between gears and pendulums, between springs and escapements, between the mechanical heart of the device and the public face that would show its truth to the world. These specialists worked in secrecy, not because their task was sensitive, but because the clock was intended to be a surprise, a gift to the people of Baghdad that would demonstrate the empire's benevolence and technical mastery. But surprises have a way of becoming omens when the context is wrong, and the context surrounding the Chishla complex was growing more troubling with each passing month. Reports of strange activities, rumors of people entering the facility and never being seen again, whispers about rooms that were supposed to be empty but showed signs of recent use. The clock tower, intended as a symbol of progress and precision, began to acquire a different kind of symbolic weight. It became the eye that never closed, watching over Baghdad with mechanical indifference. It became the voice that could not be silenced, announcing each hour with the same relentless regularity that marked all the complex's other functions. When the tower was finally completed in late 1862, its full height reached approximately 30 meters above the courtyard floor, though measurements varied depending on how the height was calculated and which point was used as the base reference. The clock chamber itself sat at roughly 23 meters, positioned to provide clear sightlines across the city while remaining accessible for maintenance and adjustment. The first public demonstration of the clock came on a Friday in November 1862, timed to coincide with the completion of the entire complex. The mechanism was wound, the weights were set, and at precisely noon, the bell rang out across Baghdad with a clarity and volume that surprised even those who had designed it. The sound carried farther than anyone had expected, reaching neighborhoods that had no direct view of the tower itself. This acoustic power quickly became part of the tower's identity. The bell could summon people to attention from distances that had previously required human messengers. It could interrupt conversations, pause activities, demand acknowledgement of its authority over time itself. In a city where time had always been measured by the sun and the call to prayer, the mechanical regularity of the clock represented a fundamental shift in the nature of temporal experience. But mechanical regularity also meant mechanical indifference. The clock would ring at noon whether the moment was joyous or tragic, whether the city was celebrating or mourning, whether life was flourishing or suffering. Time, as measured by the state, had no emotional content. It simply was, and everything else had to accommodate itself to its demands. The completion of the Chishla complex marked the beginning of a new chapter in Baghdad's history, though few recognized the significance of that chapter at the time. What appeared to be simply a new government building was actually the physical manifestation of a new relationship between the state and its subjects, the relationship of the machine to the parts it was designed to control. The building began its operational life with ceremonies appropriate to its official function. Government offices were staffed. Military units took up residence in the barracks. Administrative procedures were established for the various functions that would be carried out within the complex walls. Everything appeared normal, efficient, proper. But normality, in the context of state power, often conceals functions that are anything but normal. The same corridors that carried clerks to their desks could carry prisoners to their cells. The same courtyards that provided space for military drills could serve as stages for more sinister performances. The same clock that announced the time for public meetings could also mark the hours of private interrogations. The Chishla complex was designed to be efficient, and efficiency in the management of human beings often requires capabilities that are better left unspoken. The building was ready to serve whatever purposes the state might require, whether those purposes appeared in the official documentation or remained hidden in the spaces between the lines. The light comes slow to Baghdad in the hours before dawn. It seeps across the Tigris like spilled ink, turning the water from black to gray to brown. And with that light comes the sound that will soon govern every minute of every day in the Chishla complex. The bell in the clock tower, ringing out 5 o'clock in the morning with mechanical precision, indifferent to the human cost of the schedule it enforces. This is reveille, not just for soldiers, but for the entire machinery of control that the Ottoman state has constructed on the riverbank. In the barracks, men roll from their narrow beds and begin the choreographed dance of military routine. In the offices, clerks light their lamps and open their ledgers to record the day's transactions in human lives. And in the holding rooms below, where the building keeps its most closely guarded secrets, other kinds of schedules begin their relentless progression. The first lesson of institutional control is rhythm. Not violence, though violence always lurks in the shadows. Not fear, though fear permeates everything like the river's morning mist. Rhythm, the steady, hypnotic pulse of routine that gradually transforms free will into muscle memory, resistance into compliance, human beings into components in a machine they no longer remember choosing to join. At 5:30, the first shift of guards makes their rounds through the corridors. Their boots echo against stone floors in a cadence that has been perfected through months of repetition. Left foot, right foot, pause at the corner, check the sight lines, count the keys, verify that every door remains exactly as it was left the night before. The sound of their passage becomes part of the building's heartbeat, a rhythm so constant that its absence would be noticed immediately by everyone within the walls. These corridors were designed for this kind of systematic movement. Wide enough for 2 men to walk side by side, narrow enough that 3 would create a crowd. High ceilings that amplify sound while making whispered conversations impossible. No alcoves, no blind corners, no spaces where someone could hide from observation or surveillance. Every inch of pathway serves the same purpose: the efficient circulation of power through human geography. The guards themselves are part of this geography, human components selected for their ability to become predictable. They follow routes that have been mapped to ensure complete coverage of the facility's interior spaces. They carry keys according to protocols that distribute access while preventing any single individual from moving freely through the entire system. They report at intervals that create overlapping fields of observation, making it impossible for any activity to occur without witnesses. But witness protection goes both ways in a place like this. The guards who see everything must also learn to see nothing when seeing becomes inconvenient for the system they serve. They develop a kind of selective blindness, a trained inability to process information that might complicate their simple function as human surveillance devices. This blindness becomes so natural that they eventually forget they ever possessed the capacity for more complex vision. At 6 o'clock, the bell rings again, and the building shifts to its next operational mode. The supply routes open. Wagons approach from the city, carrying the raw materials that keep the complex functioning: food, water, lamp oil, firewood, paper, ink, and other substances whose official purposes are recorded in procurement ledgers while their actual uses remain more ambiguous. A steady stream of commerce that disappears into the building's interior and emerges as something else entirely. The logistics of maintaining a facility like this are staggering in their complexity. Every day, several hundred people must be fed, housed, equipped, and coordinated. Every day, tons of waste must be removed and disposed of without attracting attention from the surrounding neighborhoods. Every day, the delicate balance between visibility and invisibility must be maintained so that the complex appears normal while concealing functions that normal people would find disturbing. Food procurement alone requires a network of suppliers who ask no questions about quantity fluctuations. One day the complex might feed 300 people, the next day 400, the day after that 250. These variations follow no pattern visible to outside observers, but they reflect the ebb and flow of the building's hidden population, the people who are fed but not acknowledged, housed but not documented, managed but not officially present. The procurement officer responsible for these supplies is a man named Hassan al-Baghdadi, whose ledgers show remarkable attention to detail in some areas and strange gaps in others. His records meticulously document every bag of rice, every barrel of oil, every bundle of firewood. But there are line items that defy easy categorization: special provisions, administrative necessities, security requirements. These euphemisms appear with increasing frequency as the months pass, suggesting that the building's appetite for unusual materials is growing. Water management presents even more complex challenges. Baghdad's climate means that enormous quantities must be stored and distributed daily, but the building's consumption exceeds what its visible population should require. Extra cisterns have been dug in basement levels, accessed through passages that don't appear on architectural drawings. These cisterns serve multiple purposes: drinking water for official personnel, cleaning water for maintenance operations, and other purposes that require their location to remain uncharted. The waste removal system tells its own story: human waste, food scraps, ash from fires, paper from offices. All of this must be collected and transported away from the complex without creating health hazards or attracting unwanted attention. But the quantities again exceed what the official population should generate, and the timing of removal follows patterns that suggest coordination with activities that occur outside normal working hours. More troubling are the items that appear in the waste stream but have no apparent source in the supply stream: cloth that doesn't match any uniforms worn by official personnel, metal fragments that don't correspond to any maintenance activities, organic matter that resists easy identification. These anomalies are noted by the waste handlers but never explained by the supervisors who review their reports. At 7 o'clock, the clock tower announces the beginning of the official working day, and the complex transforms again. Office workers arrive from their homes in the city, clerks and secretaries and administrators whose presence provides the complex with its public face. These are the people who interact with visitors, who maintain correspondence with other government offices, who create the paper trail that justifies the facility's existence to anyone who might question its purposes. Their work appears routine, even mundane: processing applications, filing reports, managing budgets, responding to inquiries from higher authorities. But this mundane work serves as camouflage for other activities that require official documentation. Every legitimate transaction provides cover for transactions that exist in the margins between legal and illegal, documented and undocumented, acknowledged and denied. The filing system reflects this dual purpose. Official records are stored in cabinets that are readily accessible to authorized personnel and visiting inspectors. Unofficial records are stored in basement rooms that require special keys and special authorization. These basement files contain information that would be difficult to explain: payment vouchers for services that have no official names, personnel records for employees whose identities are classified, and correspondence with individuals whose existence is officially denied. The most revealing document in the basement files is a memorandum dated September 15, 1863, addressed to Governor Mehmed Namik Pasha from his deputy for special operations. The memo is brief, written in the careful language of bureaucracy, but its implications are unmistakable. The additional accommodations have proven adequate for current requirements. Recommend expansion of capacity before winter season. Staff training progressing satisfactorily. No incidents requiring external intervention. Additional accommodations. Capacity expansion. Staff training. The language is neutral, professional, unremarkable. But read in the context of other documents in the same file, it becomes clear that these euphemisms describe a system that has grown far beyond its original parameters. What began as occasional detention of political suspects has evolved into something more systematic, more permanent, more carefully designed to avoid outside scrutiny. The training mentioned in the memo refers to a program that teaches selected personnel how to manage human beings who have been classified as special cases. These are individuals whose presence in the facility must be concealed from routine inspections, whose treatment must be adjusted to prevent them from attracting attention through resistance or complaint, whose very existence must be carefully managed to avoid complications for the administrative apparatus. Training manuals for this program are stored in a locked cabinet in the deputy's office. Written in Ottoman Turkish, they provide detailed instructions for psychological manipulation, systematic isolation, and the gradual elimination of a subject's capacity for independent thought or action. The techniques described are sophisticated, based on careful observation of human behavior under controlled conditions. They represent a systematic approach to the destruction of personality that is far more refined than simple physical torture. The psychological insight underlying these techniques is chilling in its clarity. Human beings can be transformed into compliant objects through the careful manipulation of their environment and social connections, isolation from familiar people and places, disruption of normal sleep and eating patterns, constant uncertainty about rules and expectations, punishment and reward applied in patterns that prevent subjects from developing successful coping strategies. But the most disturbing element of the training program is its emphasis on maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Personnel are taught how to interact with subjects in ways that seem helpful and compassionate, while actually increasing their psychological vulnerability. They learn to offer hope as a form of torture, to provide comfort as a method of control, to demonstrate kindness as a strategy for extracting compliance. At 8 o'clock, as the morning sun climbs higher above the Tigris, the complex settles into its daily rhythm of visible activity and invisible purpose. Visitors arrive for meetings with government officials. Citizens come to submit petitions or pay taxes. Merchants deliver goods or collect payments for services. To all outward appearances, the Chishla functions exactly as its architects intended, a center of legitimate administration serving the people of Baghdad province. But beneath this surface activity, other rhythms are operating according to different schedules: the movement of individuals who enter through secondary entrances, the delivery of supplies that arrive after normal business hours, the maintenance activities that occur in areas where routine personnel are not permitted. These parallel systems operate with the same precision as the official activities, but they remain invisible to anyone who lacks the proper clearance to observe them. The key to this invisibility is compartmentalization. Most people who work in the complex know only their specific function and the functions immediately adjacent to theirs. Clerks know about paperwork but not about basement storage. Guards know about security but not about special operations. Kitchen staff know about food preparation but not about dietary restrictions for special populations. Each person performs their role competently while remaining ignorant of the larger system they serve. This compartmentalization is maintained through careful management of information flows. Personnel are told exactly what they need to know to perform their duties and nothing more. They are discouraged from asking questions about activities outside their immediate responsibility. They are trained to report unusual observations to supervisors rather than investigating them independently, and they are regularly rotated between assignments to prevent them from developing too clear a picture of any single aspect of the complex's operations. The psychological pressure of this compartmentalization gradually shapes everyone who works in the building. They learn to see without seeing, to know without knowing, to participate without understanding. This selective awareness becomes so automatic that most personnel are genuinely unaware of their own ignorance. They believe they understand the system they serve because they competently perform the functions they have been assigned. But ignorance has its own costs. Personnel who cannot see the full scope of their participation cannot make informed moral judgments about their actions. They cannot resist orders that violate their conscience because they cannot see the consequences of those orders beyond their immediate tasks. They become instruments of purposes they do not understand, serving ends they have never been allowed to evaluate. At 9 o'clock, the first of the day's special activities begins. A small group of individuals enters the complex through the rear entrance, their arrival carefully timed to avoid the peak hours of routine traffic. They are escorted quickly through corridors that bypass the main administrative areas, moving toward sections of the building that serve functions not described in official documentation. These individuals are classified as political detainees, though the criteria for this classification remain deliberately vague. Some are accused of expressing opinions critical of Ottoman authority. Others are suspected of maintaining correspondence with individuals deemed unreliable. Still others have simply been identified as potential sources of instability, individuals whose freedom of movement might complicate the government's efforts to maintain order in the province. The legal basis for their detention is equally vague. No formal charges have been filed, no trials have been scheduled, no sentences have been pronounced. They exist in a legal limbo that allows their indefinite confinement without triggering the procedural protections that would normally apply to criminal suspects. This limbo is not an accident. It is the deliberate creation of a system designed to operate outside the constraints of normal jurisprudence. The processing of these detainees follows procedures that have been refined through months of experimentation. They are photographed using techniques imported from European police departments. They are measured and weighed according to anthropometric systems developed by criminal identification specialists. They are questioned using methods designed to extract information while preventing them from understanding the scope or purpose of their interrogation. Most importantly, they are classified according to a system that determines their treatment throughout their confinement. Some are categorized as potential sources of valuable information and are housed in conditions designed to encourage cooperation. Others are classified as hopeless cases and are subjected to treatment designed to neutralize their capacity for future resistance. The classification system is based not on the severity of their alleged crimes, but on their assessed value to the security apparatus. The interrogation rooms where this assessment takes place have been designed with the same attention to psychological detail that characterizes every aspect of the complex's operations. The lighting, the furniture, the acoustic properties, even the color of the walls have been selected to create specific emotional responses in subjects undergoing questioning. The goal is not simply to extract information, but to create psychological conditions that make resistance seem futile and cooperation seem inevitable. The most sophisticated of these rooms is located in the basement level, accessible only through a corridor that bypasses the main traffic patterns of the building. This room has been equipped with recording devices that capture not only voices, but also subtle changes in breathing, heart rate, and body temperature that might indicate deception or emotional stress. The data from these sessions is analyzed by specialists trained in the emerging science of psychological measurement. But the real innovation of the system lies not in its technical sophistication, but in its integration with the building's administrative apparatus. Every interrogation generates paperwork that flows through the same channels as routine government business. Every decision about detention or release is processed through the same bureaucratic mechanisms that handle tax collection or public works projects. The machinery of oppression hides inside the machinery of ordinary administration. At 10 o'clock, the bell in the clock tower marks another transition in the complex's daily cycle. The morning meetings begin in conference rooms where officials discuss matters ranging from budget allocations to personnel assignments to strategic planning for maintaining order in the province. These meetings appear on official calendars and are attended by personnel whose presence can be easily verified, but they also serve as cover for other meetings that discuss matters not suitable for official documentation. The conference room used for these unofficial meetings is located adjacent to the official conference room, separated by a wall thin enough to allow discreet communication between the two spaces. While routine administrative matters are being discussed publicly, sensitive strategic matters are being discussed privately. Participants in the unofficial meetings can appear on attendance records for the official meetings, creating documentary evidence of their presence that conceals the true nature of their activities. The matters discussed in these unofficial meetings involve the coordination of activities across multiple government departments. The police, the military, the Customs Service, the Tax Collection Bureau, and the Postal Service all participate in intelligence-gathering operations that feed information back to the Special Operations staff in the Shishla complex. This coordination creates a surveillance network that extends throughout the province while remaining officially invisible. The techniques used in this surveillance network reflect the same sophisticated understanding of human psychology that characterizes the detention operations. Rather than relying on obvious methods like uniformed agents or formal informants, the system cultivates sources who are unaware that they are providing intelligence, merchants who report unusual commercial activities, teachers who identify students asking troublesome questions, religious leaders who note changes in their congregation's behavior patterns. These unwitting sources are managed through a system of rewards and punishments so subtle that they rarely recognize the connection between their reports and the consequences that follow. A merchant who reports suspicious activities might find that his tax assessments become more favorable. A teacher who identifies problematic students might discover opportunities for professional advancement. The correlation is never obvious, never documented, never acknowledged, but it is consistent enough to shape behavior throughout the province. The information collected through this network flows back to the Chishla complex through channels that parallel the official government communication systems. Code words are embedded in routine correspondence. Statistical reports contain data that measures more than their official subjects. Personnel transfers and promotions follow patterns that reflect security considerations rather than administrative efficiency. All of this information is processed by specialists who maintain offices in the basement levels of the complex, working with files that contain detailed profiles of thousands of individuals throughout the province. These profiles include not only basic biographical information, but psychological assessments, social network analyses, and predictive evaluations of each subject's potential for future resistance or cooperation with government policies. The sophistication of this profiling system represents a quantum leap in the technology of social control. For the first time in Ottoman administrative history, the government possesses detailed, systematic information about the political attitudes and personal vulnerabilities of large numbers of its subjects. This information can be used to prevent resistance before it develops, to neutralize opposition before it becomes organized, to eliminate threats before they become dangerous. But information is only valuable if it can be acted upon, and action requires operational capabilities that extend beyond surveillance and analysis. The Chishla complex has developed these capabilities through the creation of special units trained in techniques that blur the boundary between law enforcement and political warfare. These units operate under cover identities that allow them to intervene in situations throughout the province without revealing their connection to the government. The clock tower strikes 11, and the morning's activities shift toward their peak intensity. The complex now operates at full capacity, with every office occupied, every corridor busy with purposeful traffic, every system functioning according to its designed parameters. To anyone observing from the outside, this appears to be exactly what it claims to be: a well-managed government facility serving the legitimate needs of imperial administration. But the very efficiency of this appearance serves as camouflage for activities that would be much more difficult to conceal in a chaotic or obviously secretive environment. The best place to hide a conspiracy is inside an institution that appears to be operating normally. The best way to conceal extraordinary activities is to embed them in the routine operations of ordinary bureaucracy. The genius of the Chishla system lies precisely in this integration of the normal and the abnormal, the legal and the extra-legal, the administrative and the operational. It represents a new form of state power that operates simultaneously within and outside the traditional constraints of law and custom, creating capabilities that are far more flexible and far more dangerous than anything that could be achieved through conventional means. As Baghdad's morning sun climbs toward its noon zenith, the clock tower prepares to announce another hour in the relentless progression of institutional time. But time in the Chishla complex is not simply measured in hours and minutes. It is measured in the gradual transformation of human beings into administrative problems, political resistance into bureaucratic challenges, and individual conscience into institutional compliance. The bell is about to ring, and when it does, it will mark not just another hour in the day, but another step in the systematic reconstruction of power itself. The machine is running smoothly, the schedule is being maintained, and somewhere in the basement levels of the complex, other schedules are operating according to rhythms that have nothing to do with clocks. The clock strikes noon with the weight of iron against bronze. a sound that carries across Baghdad like a judgment rendered in metal. This is the hour when shadows are shortest and truths are hardest to hide. But inside the Chishla complex, shadows have learned to bend according to different laws. The corridor economy is in full operation now, moving its human cargo through pathways designed to ensure that what needs to remain invisible never intersects with what must appear legitimate. Follow the corridors. They are the nervous system of this institution, the channels through which power flows in carefully regulated currents. Each corridor serves multiple functions simultaneously: pathway for routine traffic, conduit for sensitive communications, and barrier between activities that must never acknowledge each other's existence. The architecture itself has become a language of control, speaking in the grammar of walls and doorways, of sight lines and blind spots, of spaces that connect and spaces that separate. The main corridor runs east to west through the center of the complex, wide enough for formal processions but narrow enough to create bottlenecks when crowd control becomes necessary. This is the public face of the building circulation system, the route taken by visitors, routine personnel, and anyone whose presence must be documented in official records. The stone floors here are polished to a shine that reflects the overhead lamps like still water, creating an impression of transparency and openness that serves the building's public relations needs. But transparency, like everything else in the Chishla complex, is an optical illusion carefully crafted to conceal more than it reveals. Parallel to the main corridor, accessible only through doorways disguised as storage closets and administrative offices, runs a secondary circulation system that serves entirely different purposes. These narrow passages, barely wide enough for two people to pass, connect the basement levels to the upper floors without ever intersecting the public areas. The secondary corridors follow the building's structural logic, but ignore its official floor plan. They snake around load-bearing walls, duck under stairwells, and emerge in locations that would surprise anyone familiar only with the building's public spaces. Someone entering through the main entrance could spend hours exploring the official areas without ever suspecting that entire networks of movement exist just beyond the walls they can see. These hidden pathways serve the complex's most sensitive functions. They allow certain categories of personnel to move through the building without being observed by routine staff. They permit the transport of materials that would raise questions if seen in public areas. Most importantly, they enable the circulation of individuals whose presence in the building must remain unacknowledged by official records. The engineering challenges of creating this dual circulation system were solved through innovations that would influence institutional architecture for decades to come. False walls conceal doorways that appear to be solid surfaces. Movable panels disguise corridor entrances behind what appear to be permanent fixtures. Sound-dampening materials prevent conversations in hidden areas from being heard in adjacent public spaces. The most sophisticated element of this hidden infrastructure is the blind corner system. Every intersection in the secondary corridors has been designed to prevent anyone from seeing more than a few feet in any direction. This means that individuals using these passages cannot observe the full scope of the traffic they are part of. They see only their immediate vicinity, their own small segment of a larger network whose full extent remains invisible to them. This architectural fragmentation serves the same psychological function as the administrative compartmentalization that governs personnel management. People cannot resist systems they cannot see. They cannot plan escape routes from mazes they cannot map. They cannot organize opposition to operations they cannot fully comprehend. The building itself becomes a tool for managing human consciousness, shaping awareness through the careful manipulation of spatial relationships. But corridors are only half the equation. The other half is keys, and in the Chishla complex, keys have evolved into something approaching an art form. Not just the physical objects made of metal and crafted to specific tolerances, but the entire system of access control that determines who can move where and when and under what circumstances. Keys are the currency of power here, and like any currency, their value depends on scarcity, security, and the credibility of the institution that issues them. The master key system was designed by a specialist imported from Vienna, a man whose previous work had included royal palaces and military fortifications. His innovation was the creation of hierarchical access levels that could be modified without replacing the physical infrastructure. A single lock could be programmed to respond to multiple keys, each providing different levels of access, each controlled by different authorities within the institutional chain of command. The highest-level keys, carried only by the facility's senior commanders, can open any door in the complex. But these master keys are never used for routine purposes, never carried during normal activities, never entrusted to subordinates under any circumstances. They exist primarily as symbols of ultimate authority, physical manifestations of the power to ignore any barrier, to access any space, to override any restriction. The second-level keys, carried by department heads and shift supervisors, provide access to specific functional areas but not to the entire system. A security supervisor can open all the doors in the detention areas but not the doors in the administrative offices. A logistics manager can access all the storage and supply areas but not the interrogation rooms. This compartmentalization ensures that even senior personnel cannot move freely throughout the complex without coordination and authorization from other departments. The third-level keys, carried by ordinary guards and clerks, provide access only to the specific areas required for immediate duties. These keys are issued at the beginning of each shift and collected at the end, ensuring that off-duty personnel cannot access restricted areas. The keys themselves are numbered and tracked, with detailed records maintained of who carries which key, during which shift, and for what specific purposes. But the most important keys in the entire system are those that provide access to the secondary corridor network. These keys are not issued according to rank or department, but according to security clearance levels that reflect knowledge of the building's unofficial functions. Someone might hold senior administrative position but lack the clearance necessary to access the hidden circulation system. Conversely, relatively junior personnel might carry keys that provide access to highly sensitive areas. The psychological effect of this key system on personnel is profound and carefully calculated. Everyone who works in the building is constantly aware of the doors they cannot open, the corridors they cannot enter, the areas that remain off-limits to their level of authorization. This creates a pervasive sense of partial knowledge, of being simultaneously inside and outside the institutional power structure, of serving purposes that extend beyond their immediate understanding. More disturbing is the way the key system shapes behavior even in areas where people do have access. Personnel become accustomed to checking authorization before moving through doorways, to requesting permission before entering spaces that appear unrestricted, to accepting limitations on their movement even when those limitations serve no apparent functional purpose. The building trains everyone who works in it to become compliant with restrictions they do not understand. The master keyring, maintained in a locked safe in the complex's command center, contains physical access to every space in the building. But there is one key on this ring that has never been used, one door that has never been opened since the building's construction was completed. This key is longer than the others, made of different metal, crafted to different specifications. It opens a door in the basement level that appears on no official floor plans and is referenced in no maintenance records. The door itself is unremarkable, indistinguishable from the storage room doors that line the basement corridors. But the lock mechanism is unlike any other in the building. It requires not just the proper key, but a specific sequence of operations that must be performed in precise order. Turn left twice, right once, left again, then insert the key and turn it counterclockwise while applying pressure to a hidden mechanism concealed in the door frame. Behind this door lies a staircase descending to sub-basement levels that were excavated during construction but never incorporated into official building plans. These areas extend beneath the entire footprint of the complex and beyond, reaching under the courtyard and connecting to networks that predate Ottoman occupation of the site. Archaeological evidence suggests that this underground infrastructure has been in use for centuries, serving purposes that changed with each successive political authority. The current use of these sub-basement areas is known only to a handful of individuals within the special operations hierarchy. Access requires not only the proper key and knowledge of the entry procedure, but also authorization from the provincial governor himself, documented in writing and countersigned by the Deputy for Security Affairs. Even then, entry is permitted only for specific operational purposes and only in the company of authorized escort personnel. What happens in these underground spaces is never discussed in official channels, never documented in routine reports, never acknowledged in budget allocations or personnel assignments, but the indirect evidence of their use appears throughout the complex's operational patterns. Unexplained material requirements, personnel schedules that include unaccounted hours, maintenance activities that occur in areas not accessible through normal building systems. The most telling evidence is acoustic. Personnel working in first-floor offices sometimes report hearing sounds from below that do not correspond to any authorized activities. Voices, footsteps, mechanical noises, sometimes music or what appears to be conversation in languages that are not commonly spoken in Baghdad. These sounds follow patterns that suggest systematic use of the underground areas, but the patterns do not match any official schedules. When questioned about these reports, supervisors provide explanations that are technically plausible but emotionally unsatisfying. Building systems, structural settling, sound transmission from adjacent properties, water movement through underground channels. These explanations discourage further inquiry while providing enough technical detail to satisfy casual curiosity. But they do not explain the human voices, the linguistic patterns, the evidence of organized activity occurring in officially non-existent spaces. The afternoon sun shifts the shadows in the courtyard, and the complex's operational tempo increases. This is the hour when the dual systems that govern the building's functions operate most intensively, when the gap between official activities and unofficial activities becomes both largest and most carefully concealed. The legitimate business of imperial administration provides cover for activities that would be impossible to explain if observed directly. In the administrative offices, clerks process routine paperwork with mechanical efficiency. Tax records, personnel files, correspondence with other government departments, reports on public works projects. Each document follows established procedures from creation to filing, generating paper trails that satisfy auditing requirements while providing no insight into the purposes these documents might serve beyond their apparent functions. But embedded within this routine paperwork are documents that serve dual purposes. A personnel transfer order might appear to be a simple administrative action while actually facilitating the placement of surveillance assets in new locations. A budget allocation might appear to support legitimate infrastructure projects while actually funding activities that have no official names. A routine inquiry about public health conditions might actually be collecting information about population movements and potential security concerns. The skill required to create and manage these dual-purpose documents reflects sophisticated understanding of bureaucratic systems and psychological manipulation. The documents must satisfy multiple audiences simultaneously. Routine administrative reviewers who expect standard formats and conventional content, auditors who look for compliance with financial and procedural regulations, and operational personnel who must extract actionable intelligence from seemingly innocent communications. The most complex of these documents are those that coordinate activities across multiple agencies and departments. Surface messages communicate legitimate interagency business. Embedded codes communicate operational instructions. Statistical data contains intelligence reports disguised as administrative information. Personal correspondence between officials includes strategic planning disguised as social communication. This system of hidden communication extends throughout the imperial administration, connecting the Chishla complex to similar operations in other provinces and ultimately to decision-makers in Constantinople itself. The scope and sophistication of this network suggests planning and resources far beyond what any single provincial facility could develop independently. The Chishla complex is not an isolated experiment, but a component in a larger system of control that spans the entire empire. The afternoon heat intensifies, and the building's mechanical systems struggle to maintain acceptable conditions for personnel and equipment. But heat also serves operational purposes in an institution designed for human management. High temperatures increase stress levels, reduce cognitive function, and make sustained resistance more difficult to maintain. The building's ventilation system can be adjusted to create microclimates that serve specific purposes: cooling for areas where clear thinking is required, heating for areas where psychological pressure is desired. The most sophisticated climate control is in the interrogation areas, where temperature, humidity, air circulation, and even atmospheric pressure can be manipulated to create specific physiological and psychological effects. Subjects can be made uncomfortable without being obviously mistreated. Their ability to think clearly can be compromised without obvious coercion. Their resistance can be worn down through environmental pressure that leaves no physical evidence. But the building's most powerful tool for managing human consciousness is not physical discomfort, but psychological isolation. The architecture itself creates conditions that make meaningful human connection impossible while maintaining the illusion of social interaction. People can see each other, hear each other, even communicate with each other, but they cannot form the kinds of relationships that would enable collective resistance to institutional authority. The courtyard exemplifies this architectural psychology. Open to the sky, visible from every office window, accessible through multiple doorways, it appears to be a communal space designed for human gathering and interaction. People meet there, conduct business, take breaks from indoor work, enjoy brief moments of fresh air and natural light. The space appears to support normal social functions, but every aspect of the courtyard has been designed to prevent genuine privacy or confidential communication. The acoustic properties ensure that conversations can be overheard from office windows overlooking the space. The sightlines eliminate visual concealment that might enable secretive activities. The entrance and exit points are positioned to make traffic patterns observable from multiple locations. Most importantly, the courtyard operates according to schedules and rules that fragment potential gatherings before they can develop into meaningful social connections. Different categories of personnel are authorized to use the space at different times. The duration of breaks is limited and staggered to prevent large groups from forming. Activities are restricted to those that serve institutional purposes rather than personal relationship building. The result is a space that appears open and social, while actually functioning as an instrument of isolation and control. People interact with each other, but their interactions are managed, monitored, and manipulated to serve institutional rather than human purposes. They experience the illusion of community while remaining fundamentally alone in their relationship to the power structure that governs their lives. As the afternoon progresses toward evening, the complex prepares for its most sensitive operational period. Night is when the gap between official and unofficial activities becomes largest, when the activities that must remain invisible can operate with minimal risk of inadvertent observation. The transition from day shift to night shift involves more than simple personnel changes. It involves the activation of entirely different operational capabilities. The first sign of this transition is the change in key distribution. Personnel arriving for night duty receive access to areas that remain locked during daytime operations. Corridors that appear to be storage spaces during the day are revealed to be passages to active operational areas. Doors that seem permanently sealed are opened to reveal stairways, offices, and specialized facilities that serve purposes never acknowledged in daylight hours. The second sign is the arrival of personnel who do not appear on routine staffing rosters. These individuals enter through secondary entrances, use the hidden corridor system, and operate according to procedures that parallel but do not intersect the building's official command structure. Their presence is known to senior authorities but not documented in ways that would create accountability or oversight. The third sign is the change in the building's acoustic environment. The sounds of routine administration fade as office workers complete their shifts and return to their homes in the city. But these familiar sounds are replaced by other sounds that suggest different kinds of activities. Mechanical noises from basement areas, voices speaking in urgent whispers, footsteps on stairways that are supposed to be unused. The most significant change, however, is in the clock tower itself. During daytime hours, the clock mechanism operates according to its public function, marking time for the city, coordinating schedules, maintaining the rhythm of legitimate activities. But at night, the clock serves additional purposes that transform it from timekeeper to surveillance instrument. The tower's height provides perfect sight lines across the surrounding neighborhoods. Equipped with optical instruments imported from European military suppliers, it can observe activities far beyond the complex's walls. Personnel movements, commercial activities, social gatherings, and potential security concerns can all be monitored from this elevated position without alerting the subjects of surveillance to the fact that they are being watched. The clock mechanism itself has been modified to transmit signals as well as measure time. Coded sequences of chimes can communicate with assets positioned throughout the city. Light signals can be sent using shutters that appear to be routine maintenance activities. The tower has become a communications hub that coordinates intelligence activities across the entire province while maintaining the appearance of serving only civilian timekeeping functions. But the tower's most disturbing function is psychological rather than operational. Its constant presence, its mechanical regularity, its indifferent measurement of time creates a form of temporal pressure that affects everyone within its influence. People begin to organize their lives around its schedule, to measure their activities according to its rhythms, to accept its authority over the most fundamental human experience, their relationship to time itself. The bell strikes 6 in the evening, announcing the end of the official workday and the beginning of the complex's nocturnal transformation. As the last of the daytime personnel pass through the main entrance on their way back to normal life in the city, other figures begin moving through the shadows cast by the setting sun. The night shift is about to begin, and with it, the activities that give the Chishla complex its true purpose and its lasting place in the darker chapters of human institutional memory. The corridors are about to fill with different kinds of traffic. The keys are about to unlock different kinds of doors, and somewhere in the basement levels, where the architectural plans show only storage space and the maintenance records show only empty rooms, other schedules are about to commence their relentless progression through the hours until dawn. The darkness brings no peace to the Chishla complex. If anything, the absence of natural light intensifies the artificial rhythms that govern every corner of this machine made of stone and human compliance. Night is when the building reveals its true nature, when the carefully maintained boundaries between administration and coercion, between documentation and disappearance, begin to blur beyond recognition. At 8 o'clock, 2 hours after the official end of the working day, a different kind of shift begins. The personnel who arrive now do not clock in through normal procedures. They do not appear on standard duty rosters. Their names exist in files that require special authorization to access, and their activities generate reports that flow through channels completely separate from routine administrative processes. These are the specialists. Men selected not for their ability to process paperwork or maintain equipment, but for their capacity to manage human beings who have been classified as problems requiring special solutions. Their training emphasizes techniques that leave no physical evidence, methods that break resistance without breaking bodies, procedures that transform defiance into compliance through carefully calibrated psychological pressure. The heat of the day has trapped itself inside the building's stone walls, creating an atmosphere that seems to press down on everything with the weight of accumulated secrets. But heat also serves purposes that have nothing to do with comfort. In the basement levels, where the building's most sensitive operations take place, elevated temperatures create physiological stress that makes sustained resistance more difficult to maintain. The environmental controls for these areas have been modified to operate independently of the building's main climate systems. Temperature, humidity, air circulation, even the oxygen content of the atmosphere can be adjusted with precision to create specific effects on human consciousness and behavior. Subjects can be made disoriented without being obviously mistreated. Their cognitive abilities can be impaired without leaving evidence of coercion. But the most sophisticated tool for managing human consciousness in these spaces is not environmental manipulation, but temporal disorientation. The basement levels have no windows, no natural light, no connection to the normal rhythms of day and night. Time becomes whatever the operators need it to be. Accelerated during interrogation sessions to create pressure for quick responses. Decelerated during isolation periods to make minutes feel like hours, or eliminated entirely to create the sense that existence has become unmoored from normal reality. The clock tower that marks time so precisely for the rest of Baghdad cannot be heard in these underground spaces. The bell that announces each hour to the city above becomes irrelevant to people who exist in a temporal void where schedules are determined not by mechanical regularity, but by operational requirements. Time, like everything else in these spaces, becomes an instrument of control rather than a natural phenomenon. At 9 o'clock, the first of the night's special activities commences in a room that exists on no architectural plans, but whose construction required the most skilled craftsmen available in Ottoman Baghdad. The walls are lined with sound-absorbing materials that prevent any noise from escaping to adjacent areas. The floor is covered with drainage channels that can be flushed clean with minimal effort. The ceiling contains mounting points for equipment whose purposes are never specified in procurement records. This room, and others like it throughout the basement level, represents the cutting edge of institutional control technology. Every element has been designed to serve multiple functions simultaneously: gathering information, breaking resistance, demonstrating consequences to future subjects, and maintaining the psychological health of operators who must perform activities that would disturb normal human conscience. The operators themselves have been selected according to psychological profiles that identify individuals capable of inflicting suffering without developing emotional attachments to their subjects or moral qualms about their activities. But even these carefully screened personnel require support systems that prevent them from developing problems that might compromise operational security. Regular rotation ensures that no individual becomes too familiar with specific subjects or too invested in particular outcomes. Compartmentalization ensures that operators focus on their immediate tasks rather than contemplating the larger purposes their work serves. Reward systems ensure that effective performance is recognized, and compensation, while ineffective performance results in immediate reassignment to less sensitive duties. The most important support system is the administrative framework that transforms individual acts of cruelty into routine procedural compliance. Operators do not see themselves as torturers, but as technicians implementing officially approved procedures. They do not make decisions about which techniques to apply, but follow protocols developed by authorities whose expertise and legitimacy they are trained never to question. This psychological infrastructure allows normal human beings to participate in activities that would otherwise be impossible for them to perform. They maintain their sense of moral identity while engaging in profoundly immoral actions. They preserve their capacity for human empathy while inflicting systematic suffering on other human beings. They continue to see themselves as good people, serving legitimate purposes while participating in machinery designed to destroy human dignity and autonomy. The procedures themselves have been developed through systematic experimentation conducted over months of operation. Different techniques are tested on different subjects to determine their relative effectiveness under various circumstances. The results are documented with scientific precision, creating a body of empirical knowledge about human psychology that is far more advanced than anything available in academic institutions. This knowledge covers the full spectrum of human vulnerability: physical pain thresholds, psychological breaking points, social isolation effects, temporal disorientation impacts, sensory deprivation consequences, and recovery patterns following different types of trauma. The documentation includes detailed case studies that track individual subjects through complete cycles of resistance, breakdown, compliance, and psychological reconstruction. The most disturbing aspect of this research is its systematic nature. This is not random cruelty or improvised brutality, but carefully planned investigation into the fundamental nature of human consciousness and the techniques that can be used to reshape it according to institutional requirements. The knowledge gained here will influence practices throughout the Ottoman Empire and eventually beyond, as other governments adopt methods that prove effective in this laboratory. But knowledge is only valuable if it can be applied systematically, and systematic application requires infrastructure that extends far beyond the physical facilities of the Chishla complex. The techniques developed here must be taught to operators in other locations. The procedures must be refined based on feedback from field applications. The entire system must evolve continuously to maintain its effectiveness against subjects who develop resistance strategies. At 10 o'clock, communication protocols connect the Baghdad facility with similar operations in other provincial centers throughout the empire. Coded messages transmit information about technique effectiveness, subject responses, and procedural innovations. Statistical reports disguise experimental data as routine administrative information. Personnel exchanges facilitate the transfer of expertise and prevent the development of local practices that might compromise system-wide effectiveness. This network represents something unprecedented in the history of institutional control, a coordinated, empire-wide system for the systematic management of human consciousness. Previous authorities had relied on local improvisation, individual initiative, and traditional methods passed down through informal channels. The Ottoman system introduces scientific methodology, systematic documentation, and coordinated development of increasingly sophisticated techniques. The scope and ambition of this enterprise become clear only when viewed from the perspective of the empire's long-term strategic objectives. This is not simply about managing specific threats or controlling particular populations. This is about developing capabilities that will enable the state to reshape human behavior at scale, to engineer social compliance through the application of scientific principles to the management of individual psychology. The ultimate goal is the creation of subject populations that police themselves, that internalize state authority so completely that external coercion becomes unnecessary. The techniques being developed in facilities like the Chishla complex are intended to produce not just temporary compliance, but permanent psychological transformation that will influence subjects' behavior long after their direct contact with state authority has ended. At 11 o'clock, the complex reaches peak operational intensity. Every specialized facility is in use. Every trained operator is engaged in activities that push the boundaries of human psychological endurance. Every support system is functioning at maximum capacity to maintain the facade of normalcy while enabling activities that would be impossible to explain if observed by unauthorized personnel. The administrative machinery that conceals these activities operates with the same mechanical precision as the legitimate government business that provides its cover. Every action generates documentation that justifies itself while concealing its true purposes. Every procedure follows protocols that satisfy auditing requirements while enabling activities that audit procedures are designed to detect and prevent. The most sophisticated element of this concealment system is its integration with legitimate government functions. The same personnel who process routine administrative matters during daytime hours often participate in special operations during nighttime hours. The same facilities that serve legitimate purposes also serve purposes that must remain hidden. The same communication channels that carry routine information also carry operational intelligence. This integration makes detection nearly impossible for anyone who lacks access to the complete picture. Individual elements of the system appear normal when examined in isolation. Anomalies that might indicate unusual activities can be explained by reference to legitimate requirements that justify their existence. The system hides in plain sight by appearing to be exactly what it claims to be, but integration also creates vulnerabilities. Systems that serve dual purposes must be more complex than systems that serve single purposes. Personnel who participate in both legitimate and illegitimate activities must maintain psychological compartmentalization that requires constant reinforcement. Documentation that conceals sensitive information must be more elaborate than documentation that serves only routine purposes. These vulnerabilities become apparent during moments of crisis when normal operational procedures break down. Equipment failures, personnel absences, communication disruptions, and scheduling conflicts can all create situations where the boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate activities become visible to people who are not authorized to see them. The most dangerous vulnerability is human conscience. Despite careful selection and training, some personnel develop moral qualms about their participation in activities that violate fundamental human dignity. These individuals become security risks, not because they are disloyal to the empire, but because they retain capacity for moral judgment that the system requires them to surrender. Managing this vulnerability requires sophisticated psychological intervention that goes far beyond simple intimidation or punishment. Personnel who develop conscience problems must be treated rather than simply eliminated, because elimination creates additional security risks, while treatment can restore operational effectiveness while maintaining system integrity. At midnight, the clock tower marks the transition to the deepest phase of the nighttime operational cycle. The bell's sound carries differently in the stillness of the pre-dawn hours, seeming to linger in the air longer than during the noise and activity of daytime. But in the basement levels of the complex, where the building's most important work continues, the bell cannot be heard at all. Here, in spaces that officially do not exist, other kinds of time are being measured, not the mechanical time of clocks and schedules, but psychological time that stretches and contracts according to the experience of subjects whose relationship to normal temporal reality has been systematically destroyed. Minutes that feel like hours, hours that pass like minutes, days that lose all meaning because they cannot be distinguished from nights. This temporal manipulation is perhaps the most refined of all the techniques developed in the complex. Human consciousness depends on temporal orientation for basic psychological stability. People need to know when they are, where they fit in the flow of time from past to future, how their current experience relates to their memories and expectations. Destroy this temporal anchoring, and you destroy the foundation of personal identity itself. The process begins with simple disorientation. Subjects are kept in spaces without natural light, without clocks, without any reliable indicators of the passage of time. Meals are served at irregular intervals that prevent the establishment of eating-based time markers. Sleep periods are disrupted to prevent circadian rhythm-based time markers. Activities are scheduled randomly to prevent routine-based time markers. As temporal disorientation intensifies, subjects begin to lose track not just of time, but of the sequence of events that gives experience its narrative structure. They cannot remember whether specific incidents happened yesterday or last week. They cannot predict whether current situations will last minutes or hours. They cannot organize their memories into coherent stories that would enable them to maintain psychological continuity. The psychological breakdown that results from this temporal assault is more complete and more permanent than the breakdown produced by physical torture. Bodies can heal from physical damage, but minds that have lost their temporal anchor often never fully recover their capacity for normal psychological functioning. They become compliant, not just during their captivity, but for the rest of their lives. But the most disturbing aspect of this technique is its subtlety. Subjects often do not realize that their temporal disorientation is being deliberately induced. They experience it as a natural consequence of their situation, rather than as a calculated assault on their consciousness. This prevents them from developing conscious resistance strategies and makes the process more psychologically devastating. The operators who implement these techniques receive training that emphasizes their scientific nature and legitimate purposes. They are taught to see themselves as researchers investigating human psychology rather than as torturers destroying human minds. They learn to measure success through objective criteria rather than subjective assessments. They develop professional identities that enable them to perform activities that would otherwise be psychologically impossible. This professionalization of psychological destruction represents one of the most significant innovations developed in the Chishla complex. Previous methods of coercion had relied on individual sadism or traditional brutality that left operators psychologically damaged and operationally unreliable. The systematic approach developed here creates operators who can inflict maximum psychological damage while maintaining their own mental health and operational effectiveness. The techniques being perfected here will influence psychological manipulation methods for centuries to come. The fundamental insights about temporal disorientation, environmental control, administrative concealment, and operator psychology will be adopted by institutions throughout the world as governments learn to apply scientific methodology to the problem of human control. At 2 o'clock in the morning, when Baghdad sleeps under the weight of accumulated heat and the river moves sluggishly between its banks, the complex conducts its most sensitive operations. These are activities that require not just secrecy, but complete isolation from any possibility of interference or observation. Activities that push the boundaries of human endurance so far that even the carefully selected and trained operators require special preparation and post-activity psychological support. The spaces used for these operations are located at the deepest level of the basement complex, accessible only through passages that bypass all routine traffic patterns. The environmental controls here are more sophisticated than anywhere else in the building, capable of creating conditions that exist nowhere in nature. Temperature, pressure, humidity, air composition, sound, light, and electromagnetic fields can all be manipulated to create experiences that transcend normal human sensory categories. But the most powerful tool available in these spaces is not technological, but psychological. Here, operators can implement techniques that completely eliminate the boundary between self and environment, between internal consciousness and external reality. Subjects lose not just their sense of time and place, but their sense of existing as distinct individuals with autonomous consciousness. This ultimate breakdown of personal identity creates compliance that goes beyond mere obedience to orders. Subjects who undergo this process lose the capacity for independent thought or action. They become extensions of the institutional will that has reconstructed their consciousness. They retain their physical capabilities but not their psychological autonomy. The process of achieving this level of psychological control requires days or weeks of systematic intervention. Every aspect of the subject's environment must be controlled. Every stimulus must serve specific purposes. Every interaction must be calculated to produce predetermined psychological effects. The precision required is comparable to surgical procedures, but instead of operating on bodies, operators are performing surgery on consciousness itself. The documentation generated by these procedures creates a body of knowledge about human psychology that far exceeds anything available through conventional research methods. Academic institutions operate under ethical constraints that prevent them from conducting experiments that would generate comparable insights. Military organizations lack the time and resources required for the systematic investigation of consciousness-altering techniques. Only institutions like the Chishla complex possess the combination of authority, resources, and isolation necessary for this kind of research. But knowledge generated through the systematic destruction of human consciousness creates profound moral and practical problems. Operators who possess this knowledge become dangerous to the system that created them because they understand the techniques that could be used against the system itself. Subjects who survive these procedures become walking testimony to activities that must remain completely secret. The knowledge itself becomes a security risk that must be carefully managed. The solution developed here involves the creation of a closed epistemic community in which knowledge circulates only among individuals whose loyalty has been tested under the most extreme circumstances and whose psychological profiles indicate complete reliability under any conceivable pressure. This community becomes a state within the state, bound by loyalties and secrets that transcend normal political allegiances. At 3 o'clock, the complex begins its preparation for the transition back to daytime operations. The evidence of nighttime activities must be eliminated. Personnel must be psychologically prepared for interaction with routine staff. Facilities must be returned to configurations that match their official purposes. The transformation must be complete and undetectable. This transition process is as carefully choreographed as the special operations themselves. Every surface that might retain traces of unusual activities is cleaned according to procedures that eliminate not just visible evidence but chemical residues that might be detected through forensic analysis. Every piece of equipment used for special purposes is returned to concealment or removed from the building entirely. Personnel undergo decompression procedures that help them transition from special operations psychology back to routine administrative psychology. They participate in activities designed to reinforce their normal professional identities and civilian social connections. They receive psychological support that prevents the development of problems that might compromise security or operational effectiveness. The most important element of this transition is the restoration of temporal normalcy. Personnel and subjects who have been operating outside normal time must be reintegrated into clock-based schedules and calendar-based expectations. This requires careful attention to circadian rhythms, sleep cycles, eating patterns, and social interactions that connect individuals to the temporal structure of normal social life. By 4 o'clock, when the pre-dawn darkness begins its slow retreat before the approaching day, the Chishla complex has returned to its daytime configuration. The specialists have departed through exits that leave no record of their presence. The facilities have been restored to their official purposes. The documentation has been filed in archives that exist only for eyes with appropriate clearance. But the night's activities continue to resonate through the building in ways that are invisible to routine observation, but detectable to anyone who knows what to look for. Subtle changes in personnel behavior, minor anomalies in maintenance schedules, microscopic variations in environmental conditions. The building retains memory of its nighttime functions even after those functions have been concealed. More significantly, the human beings who participate in these activities carry their experiences forward into their daytime lives. Operators who have spent hours manipulating human consciousness must somehow return to normal social interaction with colleagues and family members. Subjects who have survived psychological assault must somehow reconstruct identities that have been systematically destroyed. The psychological architecture required to manage these transitions becomes part of the institution's permanent infrastructure. Personnel develop compartmentalized identities that enable them to function effectively in multiple contexts without experiencing debilitating cognitive dissonance. Support systems provide ongoing assistance for individuals whose psychological health might compromise operational security. At 5 o'clock, the clock tower announces the beginning of another day with the same mechanical indifference that has marked every hour since the complex began operations. The bell rings out across Baghdad with perfect regularity, maintaining the temporal framework that gives normal life its rhythm and meaning. But within the walls of the Chishla complex, other rhythms continue their progression according to schedules that have nothing to do with clock time. The morning shift arrives to find everything exactly as they expect it to be. Offices clean and properly arranged, equipment functioning normally, personnel alert and professional. Nothing suggests that anything unusual has occurred during the night. The transition is seamless, invisible, perfect. But perfection in institutional deception requires constant vigilance and continuous refinement. Systems that appear normal must actually be normal except for the specific elements that serve special purposes. Personnel who participate in dual activities must genuinely believe in the legitimacy of their official functions. Documentation that conceals sensitive information must actually serve the routine purposes it claims to serve. The sophistication required to maintain this level of operational security while conducting activities that push the boundaries of human psychological endurance represents one of the greatest achievements in the history of institutional control. The Chishla complex has become a machine that transforms human beings into administrative problems while maintaining the appearance of serving legitimate governmental purposes. As the sun rises over Baghdad and the river begins its daily cycle of commerce and transportation, the complex settles into another day of routine operations that conceal extraordinary capabilities. The clock tower marks time for a city that believes it understands the purposes served by the buildings on its riverbank. But time, like everything else connected to the Chishla complex, has become something far more complex and far more dangerous than the innocent mechanical measurement it appears to be.